Welcome to the 2021 Zena Sutherland Lecture. I'm Roger Sutton, Editor-in-Chief of the Hornbook and a longtime member of the Sutherland Lecture Committee, and that's Brownie. Because tonight's lecture is coming to you via Zoom, our audience is much larger and much broader than what we usually get for this event, which has been taking place live in Chicago on the first Friday and Monday since 1983. Except last year when the lecture was in hiding along with everything else. So we thought we should tell you a bit about this lecture series and the remarkable professor in whose name and honor it was created. Many of the librarians and teachers in the audience tonight would be able to tell you about the one professor who pointed them toward a career bringing children and books together, who in fact is the reason they are here tonight. For me and for any number of other librarians, including Carla Hayden, the current Librarian of Congress, that professor was Zena Sutherland, who taught children's and young adult literature at the University of Chicago's Graduate Library School from 1972 until her retirement in 1986. She served even longer as editor of the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books, assuming that position in the late 1950s. Now, I don't know what you civilians think happens in a children's literature class, but try to picture a tiny blonde woman in a psychedelic shift dress, chain-smoking Carltons, while an entire room of grad students hung on her every word. She used her own textbook, Children and Books, which she had taken over from Grande Dame Mayhill Arbuthnot, but that comprehensive book was just the structure on which Zena built a bravura performance that was one part wisdom, one part common sense, and one part stand-up, along with a running commentary that contained some of the juiciest gossip in the children's book business, all delivered in a whiskey contralto. She was also patient and kind and helpful with her students, who imbibed Zena's unsentimental approach to bringing children and books together, and her openness to the great changes that were happening in books for young people in the 1960s and 70s. Zena's students, and in subsequent years, their students, spread the Zena gospel far and wide. As Zena's retirement approached, two of her doctoral students, Marilyn Kay and Betsy Hearn, who would succeed Zena in 1985, planned a surprise. Secretly, they had solicited and edited essays from just about everybody who was anybody in children's books at the time. Ursula Nordstrom, Susan Cooper, Virginia Hamilton, Lloyd Alexander, Arnold Lobel, and more, and put them all in a book complete with a cover by Zena's great pal, Maurice Sendak. That book, celebrating children's books, Essays on Children's Literature in honor of Zena Sutherland, was published in 1981 by Lothrop Lee and Shepard, and all of its proceeds were donated by the publisher, contributors, and Marilyn and Betsy to establish the Zena Sutherland Lecture. The first lecture was given in 1981 by Sendak. Subsequent lecturers include Trina Shart-Hyman, Walter Dean Myers, Lois Lowry, Jacqueline Woodson, Richard Peck, Linda Sue Park, and most recently, Jean Lewin Yang in 2019. So you see that Jason Reynolds has some big shoes to fill. Zena died in 2002, but we are happy to continue this lectureship series in her honor. On behalf of the Sutherland Lectureship Committee, I would like to thank Betsy and Marilyn for getting this going, the University of Chicago, the Chicago Public Library, and the Hornbook for their steadfast support, our faithful audience for coming back year after year, the publishers who helped make each lecture evening possible, and the 38 authors and illustrators who have given us so much insight into not only their own craft, but into the value young people's literature brings to our culture as a whole. Militant atheist Zena will probably get me for saying this, but I hope she is up there smiling. Thank you.
My name is Shelley Hughes, and I am the Director of Children's Services and Family Engagement for the Chicago Public Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Sutherland Committee, the University of Chicago, and the Chicago Public Library, the 2021 Zena Sutherland Lecture. For the first time, we're hosting this event virtually, which means we're able to open more seats to more of you, scholars, educators, and advocates of quality literature for young people from all over the world. The work you do always matters, but this year is imbued with a special sense of urgency. In a year of loss, isolation, and upheaval, what could be more important than sharing the power of stories with youth? And if there's anyone whose work embodies the power of voice, it's Jason Reynolds. Here to introduce Jason is Dr. Sujan Huggins, Associate Professor in the School of Library and Information Science at Dominican University. Dr. Huggins is actually a former professor of mine, and I wouldn't be speaking to you today from this seat if it weren't for the lessons I learned in her classes, which I hope serves as a reminder to all of you as well, that what you do matters. Friends, please welcome Dr. Sujan Huggins.
Thank you very much, Shelley, for those kind and inspiring words. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Jason Reynolds was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Oxon Hill, Maryland. He started writing poetry at age 9, but did not read his first book until he was 17 years old, because nothing that happened in the books he was given at the time was happening in his neighborhood. That first book was Richard Wright's Black Boy, which he deemed was not a boring book after the second page. Now, as an accomplished poet and author, he does not write boring books, and the throngs of young people who gravitate towards his work unanimously agree. From the track series Ghost, Patina, Sunny, and Lou, to the adaptation of Stamped for Kids, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, from Mike Morales' Spider-Man to the riveting titles Long Way Down, All American Boy, When I Was the Greatest, and several others, Jason is adept at looking, listening, recognizing, and amplifying the stories of the young people that often go unnoticed. He writes about, and I quote, the neighborhood kids, the Black and brown kids who need to know that they exist, that they are special and valuable. His accolades and awards are extensive and include being a #1 New York Times bestselling author, a recipient of a Newbery Honor, a Prince Honor, multiple Coretta Scott Book Award honors, a National Book Award finalist for Young People's Literature, and a plethora of others. He is a faculty member at Lesley University in the Writing for Young People MFA program and serves as the 2020-2021 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. In this role, he virtually visits and has meaningful discussions with young people in small towns across America, giving them a voice through his platform, Grab the Mic, Tell Your Story. You can also follow his work in the new video series, Write, 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 spelled 3 different ways, and the accompanying blog, Grab the Mic newsletter. Jason states that he approaches writing with humility, intimacy, and gratitude, and urges those of us who work with young people in any capacity to do the same. When not writing, he cooks, swims, watches 10-minute YouTube documentaries, and spends quality time with his mother. To paraphrase what he says in his Twitter byline, which I absolutely love, he loves his mama and he loves you, unless you don't love his mama. Please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to one of my favorite modern day griots, Mr. Jason Reynolds.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here. It's good to be with you all, sort of. I'm in my house, but it's good to kind of be with you all. I have to say, I finally get to give the Zena Sutherland lecture, and I got to do it from home. That's a bummer, but it's going to happen regardless. We're going to make it work the best we can. For all of you who have never heard me give a talk before, this is, I'm not the most, I listen to the people who have given this lecture. I'm like, man, Roger's right. These are big shoes to fill, but I don't wear shoes. So this is going to be very different than, I'm not a very formal kind of guy. And those of you who know me, you know that already. And those of you who don't, well, welcome to the party. The other thing about me is that I don't actually like the idea of giving a lecture. because lectures oftentimes feel prescriptive and a little, I don't know. Lectures are funny because I wasn't an academic kid or because I struggled. Just the idea of lectures are kind of funky for me. So I'm going to do what I always do, which is just tell you a story. Anybody who knows me knows I love my mama. You heard Sujan talk about how I always, I love her. Any of you who've ever been around me, you know I love her. Some of you have probably met her at this point. You heard me talk about her ad nauseum. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I realized that I did not want to talk about my mom. And that instead I want to talk about my father. And the reason why I want to talk about my father is because, to be quite honest with you, when I was trying to figure out what to talk about, the only thing that kept coming to my mind was my father, because he passed away recently. Don't worry, everybody. This is not going to be a sad. It won't be sad. I promise you, I'm not sad, so it won't be sad. But I do want to say that at the forefront, in case anyone is easily triggered by conversations around lost loved ones and things of that nature. So I just want to tell you the story of my father and I. And I want to tell you what I've learned from him that has become really, really helpful when I think about it all now. Didn't understand at the time, but I look at it now and I'm like, man, there's a lot of lessons in this. And we're going to go from the beginning of my life all the way to the end of his, okay? I only got a few minutes. We started a little behind, so I don't have as much time, but I'm gonna get it there, so don't worry about it. My father's greatest boast was that I was the first person, that he was the first person I ever met. That was his thing. My mother had a C-section. So when I was born, when I was, surgically removed from my mother's womb, they gave me to my father. My father always said, I'm the first person that you met. I'm the first person that was introduced to you. I'm the first face you saw, right? This was a big, big thing for him. And because of this, we had an interesting bond when I was young. I have siblings and everything, but he and I always had a really, really fascinating bond. My father was a dynamic person. He possessed a little bit of everything. He grew up a street kid, a hustler from a small town who ended up making it to the big city, got himself into all kinds of trouble, but he also understood how to navigate the world. He was in the military. He grew up with 9 siblings. He just had all these stories. And so by the time I came along, my father was so seasoned that he was a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which made for the perfect kind of dad, right? He wasn't like everybody else's father. He wasn't sort of a serious man. He wasn't the strong, silent type. He wasn't any of that. My father rode motorcycles. He was covered in tattoos. He wore gold chains, gold bracelets, gold watch, tight jeans and t-shirt, boots. He always had a cigar, either a little teeny one tucked here or he had one in his mouth. Even if it was unlit, he would chew on a cigar. He always had diamond rings on. He talked really cool, had a deep baritone voice. He moved and he walked in the room real cool. And then during the weekdays, he would put on a mean suit, right? Bruno Magli shoes and dress head to toe in his beautiful suits, right? This was a man that served in both spaces. He could be the bad boy, as my mother said, I married the bad boy, but he also was this really interesting professional man. He was a psychologist, right? This interesting professional man, right? And so he could do both of these things. He was the kind of man that was an absolute protector and an absolute clown at the same time, right? The kind of man that will wake us up in the middle of the night because he wanted us to see him do somersaults on the bed. Of course, my mother hated this, but for us as children, we loved the fact that our father just did not take his life seriously. It was almost as if he understood what it is that we needed to see from him, and he would go above and beyond to make sure that he did this. My mother did not take care of us in the morning. My mother took care of us at night. She was responsible for dinner, bed, stuff of that nature, but my father was the one who got us up for school every day. And the way he got us up was he sang Rise and Shine. He would kiss us on the forehead. He would kiss us on the cheek. He kissed his boys, right? Gently. Right? He hugged us tight. He would lay out my clothes and pick out, which is always funny because he would pick out my clothes and make sure I was put together for school. He would pack my lunch and he would put me in the car and he would drive me to the nursery school and he would play all the 80s pop jams, right? Everything from Hall & Oates to Bruce Hornsby, That's Just the Way It Is. Tracy Chapman's 1988 Tracy Chapman album, all kinds of songs that were big at the time, My Sharona, right? All these songs, and I would be singing in the back, and my father would sort of say, "Sing it, Jason, sing it. Like, you sing this song," and I would be getting the words wrong, and he would be telling me that the words were wrong. Like, he would be basically telling me, like, this is what they're saying, knowing that they weren't saying that, but he thought it was funny, and he'd like to use that in moments where we were around other adults, and he would say, "Jason, sing My Sharona," in which case I would sing My Scrotum, and he thought that was the funniest thing in the world, because that's the kind of father that he was, right? At the same time, we all knew not to play with him. He never put his hands on us. There was nothing like that, but he commanded a certain kind of respect. We knew that he came from a certain environment. We knew that he had seen things and had gone through things. We knew that he was a tough man because he had been through tough things. So even though he was lighthearted and compassionate and sensitive and empathetic, he was also a rough customer. If you catch him in the wrong situation, or if you threaten his family, or if you say anything sideways, this was the same kind of man who would bring people who were suffering and dealing with mental differences to our home, which is against the law, by the way, and against all kinds of rules, HIPAA laws and everything else, I'm sure. And he would bring them to our home for family cookouts so that we, my brother and sister and I, could feel comfortable around people who were dealing with real life things, that we didn't have to see them as abnormal. We knew that they were normal, but that their brains and chemicals were working differently than ours, but that we were no different, and that we could just as easily be just like them if we wake up tomorrow morning and left just ain't on our side. That's the way it worked. We were taught that as like 6 or 7 year olds. Imagine being a child and you're sitting at the family cookout, and there's a man standing in front of you who has schizophrenia, and he's talking to himself, and you're not afraid because your father said there's no reason to fear him. He is a man. He is a human. He is here to eat and drink like the rest of us. Get him a hot dog and let's keep it moving. Right? Special, special, special man. My father would play basketball with us. He would race us. He would ride bikes with us. He would wake us up when Michael Jackson would come on, back in the day, his concerts would come on primetime television. I'm sure many of you remember this. And my father would make sure that we either got to stay up late, or he would wake us up to make sure that we could watch it. My mother also was not happy about that, but her children would crowd into the room so that we could see magic, And our father understood that we needed to see magic. This was the same man that when my mother would go out of town, my mother, who was a type A person, would basically make sure that we had food for every single day, because she knew that my father wasn't nothing but a big old kid. And so she would say, look, here's the food for all of you on Monday. Here's Tuesday, here's Wednesday, here's Thursday. And as soon as she would walk out the door, my father would say, we're eating pizza and McDonald's and Chinese food all week long. And that's what we did. And right before she came home, after we trashed the house, we would have to work extra hard to make sure we clean the house up, because none of us, including my father, wanted to get in trouble. He was a good time guy. Put us on the back of his motorcycle at 2 o'clock in the morning and ride around the neighborhood just so that we can watch the neighbors turn their lights on, just so we can make people upset. He lived an irreverent life, and I idolized him. To me, he was a hero and he had superpowers. He was a cool guy. He was a rock star. He was everything. And everybody in my neighborhood and everybody in my friendship circle and everybody in my school knew it to be so. It wasn't just me. Everybody knew that he was different and that he understood how to connect with anybody from any walk of life. And I was proud of him. And then one day, around the age of like 10, my father was outside fixing his car. My older brother and I had gone out there to ask him something. I don't remember now. Who knows? Ask if we could go somewhere, or if so-and-so could come over, if he could give us a ride, or if he could, teach us how to drive, because we were always asking for stuff like that as like 12-year-olds, right? Can you put me in the seat, And my father said, kids, I'm leaving. First, he said he was going to take care of his father, but eventually it became painfully obvious that my parents were splitting up. And it's wild, right? Because I never saw my parents fight. I never knew anything was going on. They always seemed so happy, My father was an affectionate man. I understood what it meant to love a partner because I watched my parents do it for so long. And then all of a sudden, boom, it was over. My father packed his things and he was gone. And he left the house, right? And it's an interesting thing that happens in that moment. I remember being a 10-year-old, and my mother talks about this all the time. It was tough because I remember being a 10-year-old and crying, and my mother coming into my room saying, well, what's the matter? I mean, and I'm saying, well, he's not coming back. And my mother would say, well, he worked late all the time anyway. You were always asleep by the time he got home anyway. I said, yeah, but I always knew he was coming home. And there was something really strange about that. To make matters worse, because he was gone and because there was no longer a man in the house and because my older brother had fallen to the street in so many ways and had gone through all sorts of things in high school, my mother decided that she was going to take me out of public school and put me into private school. And let me explain to you why that's a problem. I'm a public school kid. That's a hard, when you're coming from a neighborhood like mine, that's a tricky thing. And some of you who've had kids who have been through this, you know this. This is a tricky thing. All my friends go to this school. We get to wear what we want. We get to talk how we want. I get to, right? Like it's a different kind of flavor, right? What are you doing to me? My mom was like, well, we got to make sure we save your life. I can't put you through what your brother went through and your daddy not here to make sure it don't happen. So we're going to have to put you in a uniform. Whew. I'll never forget it. Middle school, I had to go to private school. They put me in a uniform. I mean, y'all know the kind, even though I technically wear a uniform now, but y'all know the kind of guy I am. Does it seem like I would be the kind of guy who would be okay in a uniform, right? Of course, I'm giving my mother the blues. I hate it here. I'm doing what kids do. I hate it here. This is all your fault. If dad wouldn't have left, I wouldn't have had to go here. Where's my friends? I don't want to go to this school. They don't understand me, right? I'm doing bad in school and everything kind of becomes a blur. But the most important part about this situation is that I hate my father. I resented him for being gone, resented him for leaving us alone, resented him for breaking his promise, resented him for taking his cape off. Broke my heart because I didn't understand. How could you do that, man? You're my hero. We were just on the back of a motorcycle last week and now you don't live here no more. Right? I'm going through that motion. I'm struggling. And some of you have gone through this. You know what it's like. I'm struggling, trying to understand, how can I put the pieces together? How can I put the pieces together? And so I make a decision that I just couldn't deal with him. He would call. My mother would say, hey, your father's on the phone. And I would say, I don't want to talk to him. And my mother would say, listen, the boys don't want to speak to you and I can't make them speak to you. It's tough. We got to let them deal with this on their own time. He'd call again. Let me talk to the boys. They don't want to speak to you. Right? And I can't make them. We got to let them figure this out on their own time. We got to let them figure this out, right? I can't force them to talk to you if they don't want to talk to you. They're heartbroken and they're dealing with what they're dealing with. I can't make them do this. I can't put them and force them to speak to a person that they don't want to speak to. I can't do nothing about that. I'm sorry, but unfortunately, we're going to have to let this thing play out. Year after year after year after year, I find poetry, right? Year after year after year, that's becoming, I'm getting better at that. I'm loving that. He's not around. He doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't see it. He doesn't see my life changing. He doesn't see what I'm becoming better and worse. He doesn't see what's going on with me. Year after year after year. Now I turned 17. I can count on my hands the amount of times I've spoken to him. Not because he hasn't tried. Not because he hasn't come by to see us. Because I couldn't stomach it. Too much pain. And at 17, he decided to insert himself into my life in a really aggressive way. It's my freshman year of college. And he says, yo, you should join the ROTC. And I said, I don't want to. Why would I do that? He said, Jason, the ROTC saved my life and I think it'll save yours. You should, and if any of you read All American Boys, you see where this comes from. Right? You should join the ROTC. And then after this, you can be an officer in the Army. You can make good money. You can see the world. Man, this would be a good path for you. I say no. He says, no. We're going to set up some meetings for you. You're going to love it. And they'll cover college. We're going to set up some meetings for you. So he set up meetings with lieutenants and I sabotaged every meeting. I'd show up late. I'd act like I was asleep in the meeting. I'd just be disrespectful to the officers. I did everything I could to sabotage every single meeting. And eventually my father lost his cool and I lost my cool and we got into a serious altercation. That night he called my mother and said, I don't understand what is wrong with that boy. And my mother said, I don't understand how you couldn't know that he ain't cut out for the military. I don't understand how you can't see that boy ain't nothing about him a soldier. Ain't nothing about him a part of it. Like, he's not an Army kid. That's not him. He's an artist. How could you not know? And my father left it alone and we continued on our years of silence. year after year after year. He would call. Sometimes I'd answer, but I'd be short. Year after year after year. Eventually, I graduate from college. I moved to New York. I know what I want to do with my life, I think. I get a deal at 21. For those of you who know the story, I got a deal at 21 with HarperCollins. I'm in the industry early. My dreams have come true. I blow all my money on sneakers and lobster. I got to figure out how to write the book that I'm signed for. It comes out 3 years later, and 3 years later, you know what happens? America goes into recession. Recession is an interesting word. When I was thinking about this lecture, this talk, this conversation, this story, I was thinking about that word recession. Because when the recession hit and you really think about what a recession does and what a recession is, it really left you with only one choice. Recession, root word being recede, right? Is to go back, to pull back, to return. But recession is also made up of the word recess, which the noun of that is a hole. And so in 2008, when the recession hit, I did just that. I ain't had no choice. I returned to the hole. And what the hole was the situation in the chasm formed between my father and I. Now the question is why? Why did I go back there? Why now? And the answer is because I needed help. I would have never gone to him if I didn't need help. I never asked him for nothing. Years, since I was a 10-year-old, I never asked this man for a dime. I wouldn't ask him for anything. I'd rather be dead than to ask my father for anything during this time in my life. But the recession came, and I lost my house, and I lost my job. And I know my mother has nothing to offer me either. So I come back home, and I call my father. I return to the hole, and I say, Pop, I need a job. I never asked you for nothing. Probably won't ask you for nothing after this. But I need you to do me a favor. I need this one solid, man. Please, you owe it to me. Please, just give me this one. I need a job. I need a job. And my father, who was the head of a mental health clinic, got me a job as a caseworker, working with people with all kinds of different mental differences, all sorts of different mental health stuff. From schizophrenia, bipolar mania, bipolar 2, drug addiction, formerly incarcerated, all walks of life. And I stayed there for a year and I do that job. And in that time period, all of my clients, my father is their therapist. So everybody that I'm trying to help, my father is their doctor. So whenever they find out that I'm Alan Reynolds' son, they say, "Oh man, your father, man, he did this, this, and this for me. Oh man, your father, he gave my father a suit to be buried in. Oh man, your father, he gave me my first job. Oh man, your father, he fed me. Oh man, your father, he looked out for me when I was going through a tough time. He gave me a couple extra bucks. He bought me some food. Oh, your father put me up in a hotel for a month, this, that, and the third." And all that did at the time was sort of split me in half. A part of me feeling really proud to be a part of this man's genetic, his DNA, his lineage, and another part of me being absolutely infuriated at the fact that these people had him in a way that I did not, right? Complicated. But because we were working in such close proximity and because my clients were his clients, our lives began to overlap in a way that I could not control. And at 25 years old, 15 years after he left, after my parents split, we had a conversation. And we talked about everything. We talked about what happened back then. We talked about what he wishes he would have done differently. We talked about the things that I did not know and could not know because I was too young. We talked about it all. And we put it back together, right? And we kept it together. Every year after that, we would make sure we catch up at least twice a year. Me and all my siblings would go to his house. We'd have crabs and cigars and beer. and we laugh and we joke and we talk about childhood, which is a sweet spot. I would call him when I had problems. Now that I was an adult navigating a new world, I would call him to ask him what I should do about this, and what does it mean to be 30, and what does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be good, and how am I supposed to navigate relationships, and am I supposed to take a risk and stop working to focus on my career, this writing thing, and how am I supposed to take care of myself, and is there anything that he knows that I need to know, and what are some of the things, that the mistakes that he made when he was younger? We're going through it, right? And it's edifying me, it's fortifying me in ways that I never expected it would. It's changing me in ways that I never expected it would. It's chemically rearranging who I am. My identity is changing in the midst of this process as I'm now engaging with this man, and he can see me once again here, eye to eye, once again, just like he could when I was a 10-year-old. Right? It's as if there's a reconnection. There's a recollection of our relationship in a very real way. And we stick like that, tight, for 10 years. And then he gets diagnosed with cancer. Now, again, I want to make sure I remind everybody listening, this is not a sad story. Don't worry. This is nothing's going to happen to me, right? I'm not going to start crying. It's okay, but I want to make sure that I'm fair to you all to let you know that like this ends exactly how you think it ends. I don't want to pretend. My father's diagnosed with cancer. Devastating news. He beats it, comes back after a year, right? When it comes back, they tell him, listen, it's aggressive, and where it's located, we wouldn't be able to remove it. My father wasn't the kind of guy to get chemo, because his whole thing was like, I'd rather just live out my life and kind of call it quits. I'm not interested in even trying to save another 3 months of it. Like if it's going to get me, let it get me, and just let me enjoy myself. Cool, we all sort of agree with that. Cool. Fast forward to the last week of his life. At this point, my father he was in hospice at home. This is, by the way, just to give you some context, this is December, just passed. This is December. December 23rd. I went to see him. My older brother and I went to see him. He was weak, but he was up. He was good. We laughed, we joked. And in this moment, because I know that it's near the end, because he told us, he was like, guys, I'm tired, right? Which was good for us because it was like, okay, we know what's happening. He said, I'm tired. So anything you need to say, let's say it. So I said, Pop, can you tell me again some of the things you used to tell me when I was 25, 26, and 27? Can you rehash? Because I need them fresh in my mind. I know you've told me these things millions of times, but I need them fresh in my mind. I need you to remind me one more time about some of these things that I got to carry with me for the rest of my life without you. I got to hold these things close. So tell me one more time what I should be doing and who I should be and what the tenets and the principles are of living a life of service. Let me know. And he said, son, the most important thing I want you to remember as you live a life of service, but what I want you to remember most though, is when you give what you want, give the things that you want away, not the things you don't want. I repeat it so that you guys understand what he's telling me. He said, if you're going to give someone something, give them the thing that you actually would rather keep, not the thing you are throwing away anyway. And I said, why is that? He said, because to give someone something you were throwing away anyway is charity. But to give them something that you actually love is sacrifice. And that is a difference. One is sympathy, one is empathy. Right? We live empathetic lives. We need not be sympathetic, right? Empathetic lives. Give them what it is that you would rather keep. Give that away. Sacrifice. When them people were telling you that your father gave my father a suit to be buried in, it wasn't a suit that I didn't want. It was a suit that I wore regularly. Make a sacrifice to show yourself approved in love. And I said, okay, Pop, sounds good, man. We talked a little more that day. His voice was weak. I've listened to this voice note yesterday, actually. because I recorded the whole thing. I listened to it and I could hear him trying so hard to speak. And I felt guilty for even asking him to speak so much, but but I knew that he wanted to say some of these things. He wanted to apologize for the 50th time about what happened between my mother and he and my mother. He wanted to apologize about the 15-year gap. We had to put it back together. It was kintsugi in the best possible way. For those of you who don't know what kintsugi is, it's a Japanese ritual in which a piece of pottery is broken, it is put back together, but it is adhered with gold or some sort of precious metal so that it actually becomes more valuable in the reparation of a thing. That is what we were going through, right? The next day, December 24th, Christmas Eve, my older brother and I show up to the house. At this point, my father is slipping in and out of consciousness. Overnight, he has declined tremendously, and he is slipping in and out of consciousness. He would wake up for a moment, but he wouldn't say anything. He would kind of sit there. He would look to the left at me, look to the right at my older brother, doze off, come back, look to the left, look to the right, but not saying a word, not moving, just kind of laying there, conscious, alive, but not living, if you know what I mean. Now, my stepmother, the sweetest person in the world, who I love dearly, it's Christmas time and she's trying to bring some festive energy into a fractured space. And so she's playing over the speakers in their house. She's playing some sort of orchestral Christmas music, right? Which is beautiful. Sounds amazing. My daddy was a bad boy, a big stepper, walked around like he owned the world, would walk into any space like he belonged there, big chest man. He was a rock and roll dude, a blues man, right? Living on the edge. This ain't what he want to listen to. You feel me? So I'm sitting in the room, my older brother looking at me. I'm looking at him. He looking at me. I'm looking at him. We looking at our father laying there half asleep. And then finally I say, hey, big bro, he ain't going. And my brother's like, oh, finally, I thought you wasn't going to say nothing, man. We got to change this. Whether he he is conscious or not, he don't want to hear this. Whether he can move or not, he don't want to hear this. Let's change it. So I go to the speaker and I turn the knob and I get it and I change it to the blues station and Little Richard is on and Little Richard is singing Lucille. And my father's eyes open up wide, boom, like headlights. And he sits up in the bed and he begins to sing the song. And he's patting his knees and he's shimmying his shoulders and he's looking at my brother and I, he's laughing, and all of a sudden he's back. Next up comes B.B. King. The Thrill Is Gone. And my father is singing The Thrill Is Gone. He's telling us where he was when he first heard this song. He's telling us about his life and what happened to him and how he fell in love with this music, why he loved the guitar so much, why he loved Hendrix so much, why he loved the blues so much, why where he came from spawned all of this interest and spawned this kind of person and how this was burning and coursing through his bloodline, right? Like, this is the kind of man that he was. This is the kind of man that I am, right? And I'm watching my father explain this to us when 20 minutes ago, he was half dead. This goes on for an hour. We laughing until he finally exhausts himself. And we say, Pop, you know what, you're tired. We're going to go ahead and leave. And he says, no, don't go yet. So we stay another hour. And then I say, Pop, you falling asleep. We're going to let you rest. I want you to get some rest. And my father says, in a way that only he could, oh, don't worry about that, son. I'm finna get a whole lot of rest real soon. And then he busts out laughing. And then we bust out laughing because it is exactly like our father to crack a joke about his own death. And those were the last things he ever said to me. And it was a gift. He left us with a joke. A gift for my older brother and I, which we'll cherish for the rest of our lives. Why am I telling you this story? Because when I think about it all now, when I really think about it, that's the story of the relationship with reading. Kids are in love with reading when they're young. They're in love with story. We start their lives with story. We inject it into everything they do. It's how they learn. It's how we connect. We inject it right into their lives. It is injected into their consciousness and into their psyches from the beginning of life. From the beginning of life, the good stuff, the bad stuff, right? All of those stories, whether it be their own, our families, books, fairy tales, everything sort of amalgamating inside of their bodies, living in their whole worlds, living in their bodies from childhood, right? The good stuff, the bad stuff, the ugly stuff, the different stuff, a little bit of the hard stuff, a little bit of the easy stuff, you know, a little rock and roll, right? A little Christmas music, some flute, some guitar, right? A tough guy and a man who kisses his kids, both. There wasn't no woman who lived in a shoe. It's a story about poverty, if you ask me, right? But like we do this, right? It's a natural thing. And then all of a sudden, unbeknownst to us, something happens where the relationship fractures, boom, and everything stops. Everything stops. Now, what happens in this moment is the adults who cannot blame the children for the relationship being fractured, because the child has nothing to do with the relationship being fractured. What the adults do is they say, look, what you want me to do? He don't want to talk to you. He don't want to talk to you. He got to sort that out on his own, instead of trying to figure out more creative ways to engage me. The truth of the matter is my parents could have saved me them 15 years. I don't hold it against them. I regret not having them. They could have figured it out. Like, we could have found a creative way to do it, but they had their own pain, right? And they weren't able to sort it out. They couldn't figure out how to do that. That's okay. We're only human. But think about that in relationship to the way that our children are reading and their relationship with reading, and what happens when the valley comes and we're all like, I don't know what to do with these boys. I don't know what to do. I don't know why they won't read. Let's figure it out. There has to be a creative way. It can't just be, I'm gonna have to let them just figure it. I'm gonna have to let them sort it out in due time, or we can figure out creative ways to engage, whether it be through fresh and new books, new voices, new authors, whether it be fresh new methods, right? And ways to think about reading as a whole, not just in the capsule of a book, but in all the other ways that reading can show itself in the world. Whatever it takes, let's figure that out, because the child inherently loves it. They've just forgotten. Something has happened. There's been a chasm. Something has happened that has chopped it off. But it's inherent. Story is a human thing. It is inherent in who we are. It literally is how we are raised, how we are reared, how we learn to walk, how we learn to use the bathroom, how we learn to tie our shoes, bunny rabbits and holes. It's all a narrative. So it's there. We just got to figure out how to not let it slide. And the tricky part about it is what happens is when the actual divorce happens and the kid is left without that thing that was feeding him, that thing that was feeding them, they put on uniforms. It's a natural thing. Feels safer that way, doesn't it? Like my mother did. Feels safer. Get him a uniform. Safer to you, but dangerous in the long run, perhaps. Right? What does that look like in the long run? That uniform is a tricky thing. It's stopping me from expressing who I really am. I feel uncomfortable in this. This feels strange to me, right? I got on a uniform that I'm supposed to be this kid from here on out. And then for me, down the line, fortunately, and by the way, think about that military moment with my father, right? You know why it didn't work? It didn't work for the same reason the books don't work when we try to give them to these kids. You know why my father couldn't get me to join the army? Because my father ain't know who I was anymore. So when we're giving these books to these kids, or we're trying to teach them certain things, and they're resisting to it, basically what they're saying is, you don't know me. You don't know me. This book don't know me. You don't know me. This author don't know me. I can tell you don't know me because you keep trying to make me be a soldier. You keep trying to tell me to enlist in something that you think gonna save my life without ever knowing that I'm an artist. I'm an art kid. I'm a creative. I'm not that kid. But you're going to have to get to know me to know that. My father didn't know that. He missed it. That's what we do every day in our classroom. That's what we do in our classes, in our textbooks. And don't even get me started on the things that none of us here can control, like standardized tests and all of that nonsense, right? But that's what we do. Just go to the army. It'll save your life. It's like, but I'm not cut out for the army. I'm not made for the army. I'm made for art. Why don't you say, let's put you in an art school? Then I'd have been like, that sounds good, right? And then if we're so fortunate that they reconnect, which they will, which is our job, that they reconnect, they'll reconnect because they'll be able to do the things that my father and I were able to do. Nothing changed. The reason we reconnected at 25 is because then he could see me as a 25-year-old and connect with me on that level, just like he could connect with me on a 10-year-old level. So we got to figure out how to make sure we're connected between 10 and 17, right? We got to sort that out, right? But like when we built that relationship back up, it did exactly what it used to do to me when I was a kid. It did the same thing. It literally restored my faith in me. It restored my faith in the world. It restored my faith in imagination and curiosity. Think about that. My father was the one who taught me that to not be afraid to try new things because nothing could happen to you if you fail. Nothing's actually going to happen, he said. Jason, what's the worst thing that could happen to you if you fail? You got to start over and try again. What exactly are you so afraid of? That's what we get from books, though. Possibility, opportunity to relive and live and try and relive and live and try again. That's the power of it. That's the power. I can find my courage and my confidence in my father telling me that this is what it is. My father represents the books that I should have had when I was a youngin', or the relationship that I should have had when I was a youngin'. It's the same thing. It works the same way. So let's fast forward to his dying days. Why is it important? And I'm almost done. I want to take some questions. I know we're a little behind schedule, so I want to make sure I get your questions. Why is it important that my father says, kid, if there's only one thing to tell you left, it'll be to make sure you give the things that you want and not the things you don't want? Why is that important? It's important because don't nobody want, if you're a teacher, you're a librarian, you're a writer, young folks don't deserve your second best. I know it's hard. I know we're exhausted. I'm exhausted right now. I know we're all tired. Zoom has been killing us. Pandemic's killing us. The baby's doing the best they can. They killing us. And so what? If you love them, then you sacrifice. And to sacrifice, you have to give them what you would give you, which is the best. Can't be no shorts. It can't be, I'm going to teach the same thing every single semester because I don't got to think about it. If you get to that point, we should probably start rethinking some things. I love you, but this is just me being honest with you. They don't deserve your leftovers. They don't deserve our leftovers. We got to give 1,000% as often as possible. I know we only human. I get it. But if we can, we have to make sure that we're giving them the best of us, the part of us that we would want for ourselves, the part of us that you would want for your kids, by the way. Right? Like we got to give them that. They don't deserve the crumbs. And then to close, I think about that last moment when I changed the channel and I played the blues. And my father woke up, came back to himself. That's what happens when we get it right, y'all. That's what happens when we find the right book, the right story, when we engage with our young people and we realize that they're not built for classical Christmas music. That a lot of our kids might need a little blues, a little rock and roll. And if we give it to them, even if it feels inappropriate for the season, inappropriate for the occasion, if it brings them to life, then it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Our jobs have been done. That's a real thing. Watching my father go through that, watching his brain turn on. Think about what that means when it comes to our work, right? Books, children, stories, writing, all of that. Think about what's happening with my father. His brain is turning on. His spirit is turning on. His strength is accelerating. Think about what's happening here. He can move his body again. He can see us. He recognizes his children, his family. He can see himself again. He can feel like himself again. Think about that. It's an amazing thing to experience. And on top of all of that, because of that music, because of that moment of life, he could even find laughter in the midst of such pain. That's what stories do. That's what stories, when we figure out the right ones, when we do the extra work to figure out which ones are attached to our babies, are fossilized and crystallized in their brains back here because of their own experiences and their own curiosities. Once we figure out how to match them up, how to tether them together, we make them whole, or we help them stay whole. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I appreciate you all for enduring that. And I want you to know that you're looking at Alan Reynolds' son. I'm built like him. I talk like him. I move like him. I think like him. When he died, he told me, don't worry about it, kid. You'll see me in the mirror. The least I could do is give y'all a little bit of him because you missed out on a giant. One day I'll write about him one of these days. But I hope in this moment, his legacy gives you all a bit of encouragement. Thank y'all very much.
Okay. That was wonderful. That was just wonderful, Jason. Can you hear me?
I got you. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Ann Carlson, and I'm a member of the committee. And first, before we talk about the questions that I have, I'm just so overwhelmed by what you've done and what you've said. It reminds me of Zena Sutherland in her textbook. She writes, many children learn to read without learning to love reading. And you indeed are one of those who really help young people learn to love reading. So thank you for that inspiring and quite amazing lecture. Your spoken word training shines through.
I appreciate that.
It's beautiful. So at any rate, I have some questions for you from the audience. The first one, and by the way, let me say I received a number of questions, so I kind of grouped them together. So the first one is, could you share some specific experiences you've had with readers as National Ambassador to Young People's Literature?
Oh, goodness. Some specific experience with the, oh, my goodness. I'll tell you, there's a lot, but I'll tell you one that that always sticks out. At the inauguration, right? So when I'm being inaugurated, there's a Q&A portion of the show. So they put the medal on me. Jackie Woodson's there. Dr. Hayden's there. It's a whole thing, right? They put the medal on me, and then we take questions. There's a little boy sitting up in the risers, and he raises his hand, and he says, "Now everyone's asking. People are asking questions like, how'd you get into writing, or what does it feel like to be the ambassador, or when you wrote Long Way Down, what was the ending? All this kind of stuff, right?" This kid says, he raises his hand, a little short, stout little boy. He says, "What you like to do with your mother?" Right? And my mother's in the room, and she's crying, right? She's in the room. And I'm like, oh man, I love to do all kinds of things with my mom. But usually these days, we just like to sit at the table and talk. Like we don't really do much anymore. We just kind of sit at the table and just talk and share some time together, But when I was a kid, I used to love to do this. I used to love to do that. And so I'm telling him this story. And he's like, okay, cool. I said, do you like to do something with your mother? And he said, oh, yeah. Every year my mom takes me out of town. We go to Florida. It's amazing. And he's having this moment. And everybody around him is kind of giggling. And it doesn't really matter to either one of us, because it was a situation where you realize that he had heard about the fact that I talked about my mother all the time. And it made him feel confident to talk about his. And there's something really, and he just wanted to share that. He just wanted to have a moment to share mom stuff with me. And in front of all of his friends, his teacher, and 1,000 other people, he just wanted to be like, hey, I understand this mother thing. And it was just a really important moment.
Beautiful, beautiful. Here's another question we had about that. Your plans for a tour in rural areas were squashed by the pandemic. I grew up in white rural Appalachia, and I know how much your presence is needed in those communities. Were you able to do virtual visits? If so, how were you received by students, teachers, and the communities?
Oh, of course. I did virtual visits. I did West Virginia. I did a bunch of, I've done 20 virtual visits so far. And I was received, glowingly. It was lovely. The kids were hilarious and fun. And I got to hear about, where would you take me to go eat if I come to visit you? And like, oh, we'll take you to this diner, or we'll go here, or I'll take you to my grandma's house because she knows how to make the best macaroni and cheese. You know what I mean? And it was really lovely. It's always good. I think the biggest misconception about America is that there are more bad than good here. And the truth is is that the truth is that if we were able to have a little more discourse and a little more conversation, we will probably 9 times out of 10 run into a mutual friend or family member, no matter who you are and where you live. We just don't do the extra work to have those kinds of conversations for long enough to get to know people well enough to find out that we're actually probably connected in some strange way anyway. It doesn't mean that I'm excusing the terrible stuff that happens. It just means that when it comes to these kids, they're not involved in that. They shouldn't be punished by how we feel about their parents, right? The kids shouldn't be punished for that. These are children. They still laugh at the same jokes. They still want to read ghosts. They just want to talk about sneakers and rap music and video games like everybody else. And that's what it is.
It is. All right. You create characters who are imperfect, to say the least. They mess up over and over again. There's a complexity to them, with nearly all of them, even the meanest ones, having humanity to them. Tell us about your process of how you develop characters in your novels.
Yeah, I think ultimately the first thing that I always remind myself of is I'm writing human beings, not characters, because characters are caricatures of human beings, right? And if I'm writing a human being, then that means they got to be a little bit of everything going on. They have to be good. They have to be bad. They have to buck what that means in the first place, right? Is good and bad even a thing? Like, we should be challenging the binary around what is good and bad, right? Which is just a reductive way of talking about like complicated human life. You know what I mean? Because it's all relative anyway. You know, people look both ways and they talk about the low cuts and everyone's like, well, is what they're doing bad? If they're doing it to make sure that the mother in that story has ice cream for chemotherapy. If you read Ghost, is what Ghost does when he steals those shoes. Is it bad? Sure, some could say that stealing is wrong, right? But he also stole the shoes because he knew that his mother loved them so much that if he told her he needed the shoes, she would sacrifice to get them for him, and he didn't want her to sacrifice. It's complicated, right? And I want young people to grapple with the complexities of life, because one of these days, I mean, let's say you're in Appalachia, right? Let's say you're a kid in Appalachia, and you read a story like Ghost. The truth of the matter is that one day you might see that little black boy on the news. And I'm gonna need you to be slow to judge, right? Be slow to judge, right? But in order to do that, we have to see that. We have to know that that's real. It's complicated. Life is complicated. And so I think about human beings and how are we? All of us are a mess. Everybody, we're all a mess. And so I like to write messy stuff. I like to put it on the page that way. Everybody, there's something lovable about us all, and there is something deplorable about us all, whether people know it or not. You know, even in our children. Langston Hughes said we are allowed to be both beautiful and ugly because we are human. Simple as that. Everybody, kids, adults. If I ever write a pet, the pet gonna be complicated too. Everybody.
Okay, next question. Who is the author that gave you the spark to read? Excuse me, the spark where you saw yourself as a reader and inspired you to write?
It's tricky. I mean, it's impossible to answer this question. Black Boy was the first book that really kind of sparked my reading. Richard Wright. It just broke me open in a way. Sometimes reading is also about timing, right? And it caught me at the right time, and it just broke me open. Excuse me. And then I started reading Zora Neale Hurston, and I started reading James Baldwin, and I started reading Toni Morrison, which I struggled with, and took me some time to get into all of that. And I didn't start reading children's literature until I was in my 20s because I didn't know it was a thing. And I'll tell you the book. So Walter D. Myers' Young Landlords was a book that really changed everything for me. That book changed everything for me. But there was another book that I don't mention often that I should in this moment that also did wonders for me. And it's Sharon Creech's Love That Dog. Reading that book helped me see, oh, wait a minute. As a poet, I actually have a place here as it pertains to a narrative. Because that book was the first book that I'd ever read in verse. And to me, it's still one of the best books ever written in verse that nobody ever talks about, that everybody should be talking about. Sharon Creech, Love That Dog, is a masterpiece. It's a tiny little book. about a teacher trying to get a student to write poetry. It is masterful. And I read, and it was given to me by my first editor at HarperCollins, Joanna Kotler. She was like, I want you to read this because this is who you're going to become. And I said, I don't think so, Joanna, because I don't have the education for this. And she says, oh, you don't understand, son. Your intuition will take you farther than your education ever will. And that was it.
Beautiful. All right. With so much drama in the world, what do you do to keep yourself motivated and inspired?
I mean, inspiration isn't a problem, right? Drama is inspiring too, you know. So inspiration isn't really an issue. I think for me, the hard part is how do you keep yourself motivated, and even more so than that, how do you keep yourself healthy? You know, I think that to be a writer is to live a lot of your time is spent alone. I won't say I'm lonely, but it's alone. A lot of aloneness, that's for sure. And that can be hard when you can't go outside. That can be hard when you can't hug your mother. That can be hard when you can't see your siblings and your friends can't come over. You can't go shake loose, right? I just want to go dancing so badly because it was a part of my mental health. It was a part of what I used to stay healthy was to move my body. And so I think for me, it's been a lot of exercise and a lot of walks and a lot of, therapy and a lot of talking to my mom on the phone and, whatever I have to do I got to keep this healthy, And when I'm a pretty empathetic person. I'm one of those people who feels the pain of everybody. And I try to put it on the page, but sometimes that could be a little much when you don't have any outlets. And writing it's not a good enough outlet anymore. I'm not a child anymore, right? I require other outlets, but I've been okay. I figured it out, you know what I mean? Around March, around May of last year, I was like, I got to figure out something because this ain't going to work. And I'm good to go. And I still write every day and I still sort of do my thing. And the writing is a part of my self-care. It's a part of it, but not the whole thing. And I'm all right.
Yeah, it's really hard. How do you find your ways to soothe yourself? You had mentioned crocheting.
Yeah. I don't crochet much anymore, but what's really soothing for me? Laying on the couch, watching TV. I loaf. I don't know. When did it happen that all of a sudden loafing became like something that was pedestrian and everybody looked at it like we looked down on it. It's like, you're just gonna lay on the couch? Yes. All of a sudden, self-care became a brand, right? And it became about whether or not you were meditating and man, look, I lay on the couch. I watch TV. I watch YouTube. I watch movies. I watch TV shows. I just finished Shadow and Bone. It was amazing. It was a nice escape. Right? I do what everybody does. Right? I chill out. I eat, I cook a lot of food. I love to cook, do tons of cooking in this house. I love going to the market because you're in Chicago, so you guys know, when you live in a major city, you can go to the fish market. You can go to the wine shop. So I love just bopping around and getting the things that I need for dinner. I need one Bronzino. I need a bottle of Sancerre. I need a bushel of broccoli. And I'm going to go home. I'm going to cook this food. And that's what I'm going to eat just by myself. And that's what I'm going to eat. And that whole process is so soothing. Because it's literally me taking care of me. Sustenance, right? I'm literally providing myself with sustenance that I have to make taste good. And I love all of that. The process is amazing.
It is. Yeah. Well, this next question comes right on the heels of that one. Would you be interested in having one of your novels adapted to a Netflix series or movie? If so, which one? And why do you think it would appeal to the masses?
I don't know why it would appeal to the masses. I can't answer that part. I don't know. I don't think about my work that way in terms of why it would appeal to the masses. I just do my thing and hope it works. But there are a lot of stuff. There are a lot of things in motion. So Long Way Down is bought by Universal. All American Boys is supposed to be a TV show. Look Both Ways is supposed to be a TV show. The Track series is supposed to be a TV show. Stamped is going to be a documentary special. So all of that stuff is already happening. So we'll see.
Okay.
I want people to know that I don't really feel no way about it, because my doing has already been done. I wrote the book. Whatever happens after that ain't got nothing to do with me.
Yeah, you gave birth. You gave birth.
Don't be tweeting. Don't tweet me and say that I messed it up, or I don't have nothing to do with none of that.
Okay. Next question. Out of all your books, which stand out as the titles you are most proud of?
Oh, that's easy. There are 3 books that I'm most proud of. Boy in the Black Suit, As Brave as You, and Patina. Those are the best books I've written, if you ask me. Boy in the Black Suit, which is just about a boy and his feelings, his emotions. I love that book. The second book I wrote, the second novel. As Brave as You, the first middle grade novel in third person. I think it's so sweet. I think it's got so much heart. I think it's expansive in an interesting way. I love that book. And then Patina, because it's a world full of girls. I wrote a book of all girls, the whole book. It's like 20 girls in the story. And it was great to prove the naysayers wrong, because everyone's like, we don't think Jason can write girls. Let's see if he can write. Meanwhile, I write girls in every single book, but they're like, we don't think he can write a girl protagonist. And I was like, that's because you all think that I don't know that girls are human beings. If you start there, you're 85% of the way done. It ain't that hard. It ain't that hard. And so that was basically my, me being like, nah, read that. What you think? It is the best book in the track series, if you ask me.
It is. It is. All right. I have a question, by the way. If any of you want to ask questions, we still have a few minutes left. I'm on my last card. As a book collector, I want to thank you for telling us about your books and Langston Hughes's letter on last week's celebrity edition of Antique Roadshow.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about that experience.
Oh, man. So first, one must know that I grew up loving that show. My mom was an antiquer. I grew up in a house full of old things, and we were always taught that like old things are special things, that everything sort of, once it's worn and patinaed and that there's just character to it. And, but I lived around that my whole life. My father and mother both were people like that. And so to be called on that show was really cool. To be asked to be a part of that was really cool. I mean, it's one of those weird moments. Look, I live my life every day as just my mama's son, right? Jason Reynolds, Isabel Reynolds' son, right? That's it. I'm like, all of the extra noise has nothing to do with my everyday life, because that's all like on the internet, or if I go outside and somebody says, oh, aren't you Jason? Or like, but I don't really, it's weird. I don't live like that. I live a very normal, down to earth, laying on a couch life, right? And so to get a phone call where they're like, yo, we want to use Jason for the celebrity edition of Antiques Roadshow, it was just it was an honor for me. And it was like, wow, that's really cool that you guys are going to come and explore my place and my things. And I don't know, it was like a dream come true. And they were so sweet and really interesting and really interested. And we taped a lot of things that you just couldn't see because we couldn't put it all on there. Like the cookie jar was on there. This is like a 100-year-old toy that my like grandmother used to play with. My mom played with it as a kid. I mean, this was a toy from back in the day. Like, it's crazy. I've got like an old Howdy Doody that was my father's. I've got a 150-year-old upright piano upstairs. That was my father's, that he got from somebody. We don't know who, right? Like I have my house is full of just like, I have all this artwork that I've collected over the years. I've got, just stuff everywhere. And we couldn't get to everything, but it was super cool to just be a part of it,
Well, it's probably that attachment to history. I see your rolling pins behind you. Those
yeah.
are very old.
They are very old. I love, you know what it is? I love the old things because there's a historic element to it, but also because at that point in America, the country still believed in artisanship. Those rollers are made by somebody's hand. And that's the difference, right? Like people were like, well, what's the big deal about like, why'd you show like the old Rolex? And it's like, because those two watches were made by someone's hand. That's not a machine. Someone's hand put together, arguably one of the greatest engineering feats on the face of the planet. This big, a whole world in 30 millimeters. That functional in their own without a battery, right? People see it as like it's a luxury good. No. it's an engineering feat and that we don't do anymore. And that is interesting to me. That is interesting, you know? And so as somebody who makes things for a living and who understands process, I value knowing that somebody's hands touched this thing. Somebody's hands made this. And it means the world to me.
Here's a question we have. Thank you much for your stories, Jason. I love the lesson your father taught you about the difference between sympathy and empathy, sacrifice and charity. Do you have any other favorite mottos or maxims you hold close to your heart or infuse into your stories?
Yeah, of course. You know, I mean, for those of you who know me, you know, I live by 3 codes: humility, intimacy, and gratitude, right? Those are the 3 tenets that to help you function, for me at least, to help me engage and function through life, especially as it pertains to interpersonal communication. If I want somebody to be with me, if I want to break down the walls, I believe in humility, intimacy, and gratitude. Try it on your young people. It'll work, right? I also believe, you know, I'll tell you 2 more quick ones. One that's really simple and one a little more complex. When I was a kid, my older brother and I used to go outside and rake the leaves. And my mother would say, rake all the leaves, get every single leaf out of the little yard, and then come knock on the door and I'm gonna come inspect it, because she was the kind of woman who inspected your chores, right? She was that kind of mom. And so we would go out there, we would rake. And then we would go to the door, ring the doorbell, "Mom, come outside. We finished raking the leaves. Can you inspect?" And when we went to the door, the wind would blow and it would blow our neighbor's leaves into the yard. And my mother would come outside and she'd say, "Guys, there's leaves in the yard." And I said I didn't want to see one leaf in the yard. And we would say, "Them ain't our leaves. The wind blew and the neighbor's leaves came." And she'd say, "I said no leaves. So you clean up the leaves and come get me again." We'd rake the leaves again. We'd run back to the door. We'd knock on the door. She'd come to the door and the wind would blow. And by the time we turned around, there's leaves in the yard. She would flip out on us again and say, "Yo, what is happening here? You're not following directions." And what we would say is, "Mom, the wind is blowing the neighbor's leaves." And what she would say is, "You have no control over what the wind is doing. And it is none of your business what is happening in your neighbor's yard. You have been given a task that you have to complete." Right? And I carry this everywhere I go because I can't control the circumstance and I can't control the person next to me. I got to get my job done. I got to if I got to go talk to these kids, it's hella high water for me. Nothing can get in the way from the work I have to do. That is the way I live my life. That is how I've always lived my life, because that is the way we were raised. You can't control the circumstance and you can't control the man next to you. You do what you need to do, period, right? And then the last thing I'll tell you all is I've been studying engineering for no other reason than I watch these YouTube documentaries. And there's this concept called resonant frequency. And resonant frequency is basically the thing that causes the operatic singer to break the glass, right? That's what that is, right? So like this is the glass, right? So the singer sings a high note and the glass breaks. Resonant frequency is the reason the glass breaks. How does it work? Well, basically what it means is if I can pluck this glass, that sound, if I can match that sound with my voice, then I'm basically matching the resonant frequency. And the resonant and my voice literally will cause the glass to be malleable because it's actually like it recognizes the thing that makes up the glass, right? It's a complicated idea, right? It's basically saying, I know what the glass is made of and I can mimic it with my voice. And because of that, the glass becomes more malleable and eventually cracks. I think about this all the time because that means it should be really easy for us to break down the walls of children. Because I am made of the same things they are made of. All I have to do is figure out what's the arrangement of that matter, how to mimic it and sustain it long enough. And then their walls will come down. It's an interesting thing to think about. And I think about this all the time.
It sounds like something your father would have said to you.
It's something that he didn't, but it's something that I'm sure we probably talked about. And he was like, I never thought about that, kid. You know?
How lovely. How lovely. Well, Jason, we're running out of time, so I'm going to thank you again. This was absolutely wonderful. And for all of those of you who are here now, Jason's lecture has been recorded and will be available on Chicago Public Library's Facebook page for the next 30 days, and then it will be taken off. So feel free to revisit this amazing, amazing lecture. So in closing, the Sutherland Committee would like to extend our thanks to Chicago Public Library, the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools, and the Hornbook for their support. We'd also like to give a huge shout out to Alexa Hamilton and to John Mangaheff for their technical efforts in arranging this lecture. And finally, we invite you to join us next year for our 39th Sutherland lecture at 7:30 on the first Friday in May. It will be May 6th, 2022, when our speaker will be Judy Morales. We hope it will be in person at Chicago Public Library, but if not, we will see you again on Zoom. So thank you again, Jason. It was just marvelous.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank y'all very much.
Okay, so take care all, and good night.